Hey, tonight we're diving into an amazing story about a tall, awkward man with a funny beard who changed America forever. This is the tale of Abraham Lincoln and his remarkable team of rivals, brilliant men who started as enemies but came together to save a nation during its darkest hour. Before we start, find a comfy spot with a soft pillow and maybe a warm blanket. If you'd like, you can dim the lights a bit and imagine the flicker of an old oil lamp casting shadows on wooden walls. Take a nice deep breath, and let's travel back to a time before smartphones, before television, even before electric lights. Congratulations, you've just woken up in America in the mid-1800s. The country is young, less than 100 years old, and growing fast. People travel by horse and carriage on dusty roads, send messages by telegraph that go click, click, click along wires, and read newspapers printed on big, noisy machines. The good news is that America is becoming a powerful nation with new inventions and expanding cities. The bad news is that a terrible storm is brewing that threatens to tear the country apart. In a small wooden law office in Springfield, Illinois, a very tall man with deep-set eyes and an angular face sits writing by candlelight. His large hands, rough from years of splitting logs and hard work, carefully move across the paper. This is Abraham Lincoln, and though he doesn't know it yet, he's on a path that will make him one of the greatest presidents in American history. Now, you might think that presidents have always been rich and powerful people who went to fancy schools, but that's what makes Lincoln's story so special. He grew up in a one-room log cabin, a tiny house made of wooden logs stacked together. His family was so poor that young Abe only had a few weeks of formal schooling, but he had something more valuable than money, a hungry mind and determination. "I will study and get ready," Lincoln once said, "and perhaps my chance will come." And study he did. When he finished his chores on the farm, Lincoln would read any book he could find, often walking miles, just to borrow one. At night, he'd lie on the dirt floor of his cabin, reading by the light of the fireplace. He taught himself mathematics, literature, law, anything he could get his hands on. By the time we meet him in that Springfield law office, Lincoln has already lived quite a life. He's worked as a shopkeeper, a surveyor, a postmaster, and even a rail splitter, which means he chopped logs to make railroad ties. He served as a captain in a militia during a conflict called the Black Hawk War, though he later joked that he fought mosquitoes more than enemies. He's been a lawyer and even served one term in Congress. But Lincoln's path wasn't always smooth. You might think someone who became president never faced failure, but Lincoln knew disappointment well. He lost elections, his business failed, and he struggled with periods of deep sadness that seemed to cloud his mind like heavy fog. Through it all, he kept his remarkable sense of humor and his ability to tell stories that made people laugh until their sides hurt. Not far from Lincoln's modest office, in a grand home in New York, a very different man sits in a comfortable leather chair, surrounded by fine furniture and expensive paintings. William Henry Seward is everything Lincoln is not: wealthy, well-educated, and already famous throughout the country. As a senator and former governor of New York, Seward is one of the most powerful politicians in America. Seward has a sharp wit and a mind that's always bubbling with ideas. He loves to host dinner parties where important people gather to discuss politics over fancy food and wine. His home is a center of culture and influence, and most people believe he will be the next president of the United States. In a beautiful mansion in Ohio, another ambitious man paces back and forth, dictating letters to his daughter Kate. Salmon P. Chase, yes, that's really his name, is tall like Lincoln, but carries himself with the rigid posture of someone who takes himself very seriously. Chase is a deeply religious man who believes slavery is a terrible sin. He's brilliant with money and numbers, and he's built a reputation as someone who stands firmly for what he believes. And in the state of Missouri, an older gentleman named Edward Bates sits in his library, surrounded by his many children. Bates is a respected lawyer and former congressman who lives a quiet, dignified life. People trust him because he seems wise and steady, like a sturdy old oak tree that stands firm even in the strongest winds. These men, Lincoln, Seward, Chase, and Bates, are all part of a new political group called the Republican Party. The party formed mainly because of one huge issue dividing the country: slavery. Should it continue? Should it expand into new territories? Can the country remain half slave and half free? A house divided against itself cannot stand, Lincoln had warned in a famous speech. I believe this government cannot endure, permanently half slave and half free. While all four men opposed allowing slavery to spread to new territories, they had different ideas about how to address it. Seward made fierce speeches against slavery that frightened many moderate voters. Chase was even more strongly against slavery and wouldn't compromise. Bates took a more cautious approach, and Lincoln, he hated slavery, but spoke carefully, understanding how explosive the issue was. As the presidential election of 1860 approaches, these four men begin to campaign against each other for the Republican nomination. Seward is the clear favorite. He's famous, experienced, and has a powerful political machine behind him. Chase believes his moral stance against slavery makes him the best choice. Bates hopes his moderate views will appeal to voters worried about the country breaking apart. And Lincoln? Most people don't give him much chance at all. You might wonder how someone like Lincoln could possibly compete against such accomplished rivals. But Lincoln had special qualities that weren't immediately obvious. He was an extraordinary reader of people. He understood what made them tick, what they wanted, and how they thought. He didn't hold grudges, even when others treated him poorly, and he had a unique ability to explain complex ideas in ways regular people could understand. On a chilly May day in 1860, these four men waited in their homes for news from the Republican National Convention in Chicago. Back then, presidential candidates didn't attend conventions themselves. It was considered improper to appear too eager for power, so they waited while their supporters worked to win votes from delegates. In Seward's elegant home, the mood was celebratory. His bags were partially packed for a trip to Washington. Everyone expected him to win easily. In Chase's house, there was cautious optimism. Bates waited calmly, prepared to accept whatever happened. And Lincoln? He tried to distract himself by playing ball outside the telegraph office in Springfield, tossing it back and forth while waiting for news. No one was more surprised than Seward when the telegraphs began clicking with unexpected news. Lincoln, the gangly, self-educated lawyer from Illinois, had been chosen as the Republican nominee for president. Seward was shocked and bitter. Chase couldn't believe it. Bates was puzzled, but accepting. The path to the presidency does not go through the village of Springfield, one of Seward's friends had confidently declared earlier. Now they all had to swallow those words. How did Lincoln pull off such a surprise victory? He was everyone's second choice. As delegates voted, and their first choice candidates fell short, they switched to Lincoln as a compromise. His careful, moderate positions made him acceptable to different factions of the party. It was a brilliant strategy, guided by Lincoln's political instincts. After winning the nomination, Lincoln faced an even bigger challenge: a general election with the future of the country at stake. The Democratic Party split into northern and southern factions, each with their own candidate. A fourth party, the Constitutional Union Party, also fielded a candidate. This division among his opponents helped Lincoln, but he still won with less than 40% of the popular vote. Even before Lincoln could take office, Southern states began to secede from the Union. They formed the Confederate States of America and elected their own president, Jefferson Davis. By the time Lincoln traveled to Washington for his inauguration in March 1861, 7 states had already left the Union. The country Lincoln would lead was falling apart. Many people expected war. Some Southern newspapers even published what they claimed were plots to assassinate Lincoln before he could take office. The situation was so dangerous that Lincoln had to sneak into Washington in disguise in the middle of the night. Now, you might be wondering what a new president would do when facing such a crisis. Most would surround themselves with loyal friends and supporters, but Lincoln did something extraordinary. He invited his former rivals to join his cabinet, the group of advisors who would help him run the country. Lincoln offered Seward the position of Secretary of State, the most prestigious cabinet post. He asked Chase to be Secretary of the Treasury, where his financial skills would be crucial, and he invited Bates to serve as Attorney General, the government's top lawyer. When a friend asked why Lincoln would bring his enemies so close, Lincoln responded, "We needed the strongest men of the party in the cabinet. These were the very strongest men. I had no right to deprive the country of their services." But there was another reason, too. The Republican Party was still new and fragile, made up of former Whigs, Democrats, and members of other parties who disagreed on many issues. By bringing together different factions in his cabinet, Lincoln hoped to keep the party and the remaining Union states united. Not everyone thought this was a good idea. Imagine inviting people who had said nasty things about you to work with you every day. One newspaper wrote that Lincoln's cabinet would be like a team of wild horses, all pulling in different directions. But Lincoln was confident in his ability to manage these strong personalities. When Seward received Lincoln's offer to become Secretary of State, he didn't immediately accept. He wondered if he could work with a man he had considered inferior to himself. Chase also hesitated, unsure if he wanted to serve under Lincoln. Bates, more humble than the others, accepted more readily. Lincoln didn't just invite his Republican rivals. Later, he would also appoint Democrats to important positions, including Edwin Stanton as Secretary of War. Stanton had once treated Lincoln terribly during a court case, calling him a long-armed ape and refusing to work with him. Yet Lincoln saw beyond the insult to recognize Stanton's talents. As Lincoln prepared to take office, the mood in the country grew darker. Southern states seized federal forts and armories. People on both sides prepared for possible war. Lincoln worked on his inaugural address, trying to find words that might pull the country back from the brink. On March 4th, 1861, Abraham Lincoln stood on the steps of the unfinished Capitol building to take the oath of office and deliver his inaugural address. He looked out over a divided nation and spoke with both firmness and compassion. "We are not enemies, but friends," he said toward the end of his speech. "We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection." But the gentle words did not stop the march toward war. Within weeks, Confederate forces would fire on Fort Sumter in South Carolina, and the Civil War would begin. Lincoln's team of rivals would now face the greatest challenge in American history, preserving the Union and determining the future of freedom in America. As night falls on our story, Lincoln sits alone in the White House, the weight of a nation at war heavy on his shoulders. His cabinet of former rivals is in place, but can these different men, with their strong opinions and personalities, work together? Can Lincoln lead them through the darkness ahead? And what will happen to a country now divided by war? The candle on Lincoln's desk flickers, casting long shadows across the room. Outside, army camps surround Washington as soldiers prepare for battle. The journey for Lincoln and his team of rivals has only just begun, and the hardest tests still lie ahead. Your eyelids might be feeling a bit heavy now as we pause our tale. The rhythmic sound of horses' hooves on cobblestone streets fades away as you drift towards sleep. Tomorrow, we'll continue our journey with Lincoln and his remarkable team as they face the challenges of a nation torn in two. The gentle light of dawn filters through the tall windows of the White House, where Abraham Lincoln has already been awake for hours. He moves with quiet determination through the hallways, a tall shadow gliding past paintings of past presidents who never faced a challenge like the one before him now. Outside, the capital city is transforming into a massive military camp as thousands of Union soldiers prepare for a war no one quite knows how to fight. Lincoln reaches his office and settles his lanky frame into a chair that seems too small for his 6'4" height. On his desk sits a stack of telegrams bringing news, mostly bad, from across a dividing nation. The newly formed Confederate States of America is growing stronger each day. 7 states have already left the Union, and more threaten to follow. Federal forts in southern territories are surrounded by hostile forces, and Lincoln's cabinet, his team of brilliant rivals, is as divided as the country itself. These early days of the Lincoln presidency are chaotic and filled with uncertainty. Many people, even some of Lincoln's own cabinet members, still think of him as an unpolished country lawyer who might not be up to the enormous task before him. William Seward, now Secretary of State, initially believes he can be the real power behind the throne, guiding the inexperienced president like a mentor with a promising student. In fact, barely a month into the new administration, Seward writes Lincoln a remarkable letter, suggesting that the president is failing to provide proper leadership. Seward proposes that he himself should take charge of policy and even suggests picking fights with European powers to unite the country against foreign enemies rather than fighting each other. It's an astonishing display of arrogance. Imagine telling your boss that you should really be running things. Many presidents would have fired Seward on the spot, or at least given him a stern lecture. But Lincoln does something surprising. He calls Seward in for a private conversation and, with gentle firmness, makes it clear who is in charge without humiliating or alienating his talented Secretary of State. Lincoln shows Seward that he appreciates his advice, but will make his own decisions. It's a masterclass in leadership. Firm, but not harsh. Confident, but not arrogant. When I feel the need to watch anyone, I watch myself, Lincoln once said, showing his remarkable self-awareness. After this conversation, something remarkable happens. Seward, the polished and educated politician who once looked down on Lincoln, begins to recognize the president's unique strengths and wisdom. Over time, Seward will become not just Lincoln's most loyal cabinet member, but his close friend as well. The president is the best of us, Seward would later write to his wife. While Lincoln is winning over Seward, other challenges demand his attention. The most pressing issue is Fort Sumter, a federal fort in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. Confederate forces surround it, and the Union soldiers inside are running out of supplies. Should Lincoln send reinforcements and risk starting a war? Or should he surrender the fort and risk appearing weak to both the Confederacy and foreign powers watching closely? Lincoln calls a cabinet meeting to discuss this critical decision. Around the long table sit his former rivals, each with strong opinions. The discussions are heated. Seward fears that reinforcing the fort will trigger war and suggests abandoning it. Chase, the Treasury Secretary, initially supports reinforcement, but wavers when he realizes the risks. Bates, the Attorney General, gives cautious legal opinions while agonizing over the fate of his home state of Missouri, which hasn't yet decided whether to stay in the Union or join the Confederacy. Lincoln listens carefully to each view, often asking questions to draw out more information. He doesn't reveal his own thinking immediately, allowing the debate to unfold. This is another of Lincoln's remarkable leadership qualities, the ability to gather diverse perspectives before making decisions. After considering all advice, Lincoln makes a clever decision. He announces he will send supplies, but not military reinforcements to Fort Sumter, placing the burden of choice on the Confederacy. If they allow food and medicine to reach hungry soldiers, peace might still be possible. If they attack ships bringing only supplies, they will be seen as the aggressors. On April 12, 1861, Confederate batteries opened fire on Fort Sumter. After 34 hours of bombardment, the fort surrenders. No one is killed in the battle, but something even more valuable is lost: the last real chance for peace. The Civil War has begun. Lincoln calls for 75,000 volunteers to join the Union Army for a 3-month campaign. He believes the war will be short. Almost everyone does. No one can imagine the 4 years of bloodshed ahead, the hundreds of thousands of lives that will be lost, or how the crucible of war will transform not just the nation, but Lincoln and his cabinet as well. The response to Lincoln's call for volunteers is overwhelming. Young men from across the northern states rush to enlist, eager for adventure and glory, convinced they'll be home by harvest time. Military camps spring up around Washington, D.C., drilling raw recruits into soldiers. The Capitol becomes an armed camp, with troops sleeping in the halls of the Capitol building itself. While soldiers prepare for battle, Lincoln works to keep the border states, Maryland, Kentucky, Delaware, and Missouri, from joining the Confederacy. These states allow slavery, but haven't seceded. If they join the Confederacy, the Union cause might be lost before it truly begins. Lincoln walks a careful line, promising not to interfere with slavery where it exists while firmly opposing its expansion. Managing this delicate balance causes tension in Lincoln's cabinet. Chase, a dedicated abolitionist, pushes for immediate action against slavery. Bates, concerned about his home state of Missouri, urges caution. Seward supports Lincoln's measured approach. The cabinet meetings often become heated as these strong personalities clash over policy. This is where Lincoln's emotional intelligence shines. He understands that his cabinet members aren't just arguing about policy, they're also jockeying for position, nursing bruised egos, and trying to influence the direction of the administration. Lincoln lets them argue, listens attentively, and then finds a path forward that takes the best from various perspectives. Sometimes Lincoln uses humor to diffuse tension. When cabinet meetings become too heated, he might interject with a funny story or anecdote that breaks the tension and reminds everyone they're on the same team. Other times, he gives members space to cool down, perhaps by taking them aside for a private conversation where they can speak freely without losing face in front of colleagues. "I don't like that man," Lincoln once said about a particularly difficult person. "I must get to know him better." This comment reveals his remarkable approach to dealing with difficult people, not avoiding them or firing them, but seeking to understand them better. As summer approaches, pressure grows for the Union Army to march into Virginia and capture the Confederate capital of Richmond. "Forward to Richmond" becomes the rallying cry in Northern newspapers. The public and many politicians expect a quick, decisive victory. Lincoln's cabinet is divided on the wisdom of immediate action, but eventually the decision is made to advance. On a hot July day in 1861, Union forces under General Irvin McDowell marched toward a creek called Bull Run near Manassas, Virginia. Civilians from Washington follow in carriages, bringing picnic baskets to watch what they expect to be an entertaining spectacle, perhaps like a sporting event with uniforms and flags. What happens instead is a harsh lesson in the realities of modern warfare. After initial Union successes, Confederate reinforcements arrive and launch a counterattack. The Union lines break, and retreat turns into a panicked rout. Soldiers and spectators alike flee back to Washington in disarray. The picnic baskets are abandoned as artillery shells explode among the trees. The Battle of Bull Run, or First Manassas, as it's known in the South, is a humiliating defeat for the Union and a shocking wake-up call. This will not be a quick or easy war. Victory will require much more than enthusiasm and patriotic speeches. It will demand organization, strategy, and leadership of the highest caliber. In the aftermath of Bull Run, Lincoln's cabinet falls into disarray. Chase blames the military leadership. Seward worries about foreign nations recognizing the Confederacy as a legitimate government. Cabinet members leak unflattering stories to friendly newspapers, criticizing each other, and sometimes the president himself. Lincoln recognizes that he needs someone who can organize and supply an army that will soon number in the hundreds of thousands. His first Secretary of War, Simon Cameron, is proving ineffective and possibly corrupt. In a bold move, Lincoln appoints Edwin Stanton to replace Cameron. Stanton is not an obvious choice. A Democrat who once insulted Lincoln terribly during a legal case years earlier, Stanton had called Lincoln a long-armed ape and refused to work with him. Yet Lincoln looks beyond personal insults to see Stanton's organizational genius and fierce determination. It's another example of Lincoln putting the country's needs above his own ego. When friends ask why Lincoln would appoint someone who had treated him so poorly, Lincoln simply replies, "We need the strongest men of the party in the cabinet. I had no right to deprive the country of their services." Stanton proves to be an excellent choice, bringing order to the chaotic War Department, rooting out corruption, and ensuring that soldiers receive the supplies they need. Over time, the man who once insulted Lincoln becomes one of his most loyal supporters, though he never loses his prickly personality or fierce temper. The relationship between Lincoln and his team of rivals deepens as they face the challenges of war together. Each man brings different strengths. Seward's diplomatic skills keep European powers from recognizing the Confederacy. Chase's financial acumen helps fund the massive war effort. Bates provides legal guidance through uncharted constitutional questions. And Stanton brings organizational discipline to the war effort. Yet tensions remain. Chase, in particular, never fully accepts Lincoln's leadership and continues to harbor presidential ambitions of his own. He cultivates relationships with radical Republicans in Congress who criticize Lincoln for moving too slowly against slavery. Chase's daughter, Kate, a beautiful and intelligent young woman who serves as his hostess, helps her father build political alliances at elegant dinner parties in their home. Lincoln is well aware of Chase's ambitions, but keeps him in the cabinet because of his talents. "I can't afford to lose him," Lincoln tells an aide. "He's worth a whole brigade in the field." It's another example of Lincoln putting the country's needs above personal feelings. As the war continues through 1861 and into 1862, Lincoln faces mounting pressure to address the issue of slavery directly. Abolitionists and radical Republicans argue that slavery is the root cause of the war and must be eliminated. Border state representatives warn that moving against slavery could drive their states into the Confederacy. Moderate Republicans counsel patience and caution. Through all these pressures, Lincoln never loses sight of his primary goal, preserving the Union. "My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union," he writes in a famous letter to newspaper editor Horace Greeley. "If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that." Yet, Lincoln's thinking on slavery is evolving. He has always hated the institution, calling it a monstrous injustice. Now, he begins to see emancipation not just as a moral imperative, but as a military necessity. Slaves provide labor that supports the Confederate war effort. Freeing them would weaken the South and potentially strengthen the Union, as freed slaves could join the Northern armies. By the summer of 1862, Lincoln has made up his mind. He drafts a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that slaves in rebellious states would be free as of January 1st, 1863. But he keeps the document private, waiting for a Union military victory, so the proclamation won't seem like an act of desperation. When Lincoln finally reveals the draft proclamation to his cabinet in July 1862, the reaction is mixed. Chase supports it, but wishes it went further. Bates worries about legal implications. Seward supports the measure in principle, but suggests waiting for a military victory before announcing it. Lincoln values this advice and decides to wait. The military situation remains dire through the summer of 1862. General George B. McClellan, commanding the Union's Army of the Potomac, is cautious to the point of paralysis. Despite having a larger army, he repeatedly delays attacking Confederate forces, constantly claiming he needs more men and supplies. His telegrams to Washington are filled with excuses and implied criticism of the administration. Lincoln shows remarkable patience with McClellan, repeatedly urging him forward rather than immediately replacing him. When aides criticize McClellan, Lincoln responds, "I will hold McClellan's horse if he will only bring us success." This patience is tested when Lincoln visits McClellan's camp, and the general keeps the president waiting while he finishes dinner. Some of McClellan's officers overhear him refer to Lincoln as that baboon in the White House. Yet Lincoln focuses on McClellan's organizational talents rather than his personal slights. In September 1862, Confederate General Robert E. Lee invades Maryland, threatening Washington and, potentially, the Union itself. The stakes couldn't be higher as McClellan's forces pursue Lee's army. On September 17th, the two armies clash near a small creek called Antietam. The single bloodiest day in American history follows, with over 22,000 casualties. Though not a decisive victory, the battle forces Lee to retreat back to Virginia. Lincoln now has the military success he's been waiting for. 5 days after the Battle of Antietam, on September 22, 1862, he issues the Preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, announcing that slaves in rebellious states will be forever free as of January 1st, 1863. The proclamation transforms the character of the war. No longer is the Union fighting merely to restore the status quo. Now, it fights for a new birth of freedom, as Lincoln will later put it in his Gettysburg Address. The proclamation doesn't free all slaves immediately. It doesn't apply to border states or areas under Union control, but it puts the moral weight of the United States government firmly against slavery. International reaction is positive, particularly in Great Britain, where anti-slavery sentiment is strong. This helps ensure that European powers won't recognize or aid the Confederacy, a diplomatic victory for Seward's State Department. As 1862 draws to a close, Lincoln's team of rivals has weathered many storms together. They've survived military defeats, political challenges, and personal conflicts. The relationships have evolved. Seward has become a trusted friend and ally. Stanton, once an enemy, is now fiercely loyal. Chase remains brilliant, but ambitious and difficult. Bates provides steady counsel, though his influence is waning. Lincoln has grown as well. The untested prairie lawyer who entered the White House has become a wartime president with a firm grasp on military strategy, political maneuvering, and public opinion. His leadership style, listening to all views, mediating conflicts, focusing on essentials while letting minor matters go, has kept his fractious cabinet functioning despite their differences. Winter settles over Washington as 1862 ends. Army camps around the Capitol are dusted with snow. In the White House, Lincoln sits by the fire late at night, his long legs stretched toward the warmth, a book of poetry, or a military report in his large hands. The burden of leadership in wartime has etched deep lines in his face, and visitors often comment on how much he has aged in less than 2 years as president. Yet there is still a quiet strength to Abraham Lincoln, a resilience that comes from having faced hardship all his life. The team of rivals he has assembled continues to serve the Union cause, despite their differences and occasional conflicts. As the new year approaches, with the Emancipation Proclamation set to take effect, Lincoln and his cabinet prepare for whatever challenges 1863 will bring. The embers in the fireplace slowly fade to a soft orange glow. Outside the White House windows, sentries pace in the winter night, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. Tomorrow will bring new telegrams, new problems to solve, new decisions to make. But for now, Lincoln closes his eyes briefly, gathering strength for the trials ahead. The first light of the new year, 1863, filters through the windows of the White House, where Abraham Lincoln sits at his desk, his long fingers holding a pen above the Emancipation Proclamation. All night, the president has been greeting visitors at the traditional New Year's Day reception, shaking hands until his right arm ached so badly he feared it might fall off. Now, in a moment of quiet, he prepares to sign the document that will forever change America. Lincoln pauses, his hand hovering over the paper. He's been signing documents all day, and suddenly, he's concerned about how history will view this moment. If my name goes down in history, it will be for this act. He tells the few witnesses present, my hand is tired, and I cannot make it look better, but history will look at it and know it is mine. With those words, Abraham Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that all persons held as slaves in the rebellious states are, and henceforward shall be free. The document isn't perfect. It only applies to states in rebellion, not to border states that remained in the Union. But it is a pivotal turning point in American history. Slavery, that monstrous injustice, as Lincoln once called it, has been officially rejected by the United States government. In the cabinet room the next day, Lincoln gathers his team of rivals to discuss what comes next. The reaction to the proclamation is mixed. Abolitionists criticize its limitations. Conservatives worry it goes too far. Secretary of State Seward, once skeptical of the timing, now fully supports the measure and works to explain it to foreign governments. Treasury Secretary Chase believes it should have gone further, but recognizes its historical importance. Attorney General Bates has concerns about certain legal aspects, but acknowledges the president's war powers. War Secretary Stanton, practical as always, focuses on how to implement the proclamation and begin enlisting black soldiers into the Union Army. This moment captures perfectly how Lincoln's cabinet functions, each man bringing different perspectives and concerns, Lincoln listening to all views, and then the group moving forward together despite their differences. It's not always smooth or easy, but it works, largely because of Lincoln's remarkable ability to manage strong personalities. The early days of 1863 bring significant challenges. The Union Army of the Potomac, now under General Ambrose Burnside, suffers a devastating defeat at Fredericksburg, Virginia, in what some call the most one-sided battle of the war. Union soldiers charge repeatedly up a hill against entrenched Confederate positions, resulting in thousands of casualties and no strategic gain. Morale plummets, both in the Army and on the home front. Lincoln sits in his office late at night after receiving the news of Fredericksburg, his shoulders slumped with the weight of so many lost lives. If there is a worse place than hell, I am in it, he tells a visitor. Yet by morning, Lincoln is back at work, his resilience one of his most remarkable qualities. While he mourns the losses deeply, he never allows despair to prevent action. In January 1863, Lincoln replaces Burnside with General Joseph Hooker, a fighter with the aggressive spirit the Union forces need. But Hooker has a reputation for insubordination and has been critical of Lincoln. In his letter appointing Hooker, Lincoln shows his extraordinary leadership style with a remarkable mix of directness and encouragement. I have heard, in such a way as to believe it, of your recently saying that both the army and the government needed a dictator, Lincoln writes to Hooker. Of course it was not for this, but in spite of it, that I have given you the command. Only those generals who gain successes can set up dictators. What I now ask of you is military success, and I will risk the dictatorship. Lincoln then continues with words of support. The government will support you to the utmost of its ability. I much fear that the spirit which you have aided to infuse into the army of criticizing their commander and withholding confidence from him will now turn upon you. I shall assist you as far as I can to put it down. This letter perfectly captures Lincoln's leadership approach, honest about problems, clear about expectations, supportive of those under him, yet firmly in command. It's the same approach he uses with his cabinet, balancing criticism with encouragement, never letting his ego get in the way of the greater good. The political challenges of 1863 prove as difficult as the military ones. In Congress, radical Republicans criticize Lincoln for moving too slowly against slavery and for not being harsh enough toward the South. Conservative Democrats attack him for going too far, especially with the Emancipation Proclamation. Peace Democrats, nicknamed Copperheads, oppose the war entirely and call for immediate negotiations with the Confederacy. Within the cabinet, these political divisions create tension. Chase continues to cultivate relationships with radical Republicans, sometimes undermining Lincoln's positions. Though a brilliantly capable Treasury Secretary, Chase never quite accepts that Lincoln, not he, is president. He frequently offers his resignation when he doesn't get his way, assuming Lincoln won't dare to accept it. Seward, by contrast, has become Lincoln's closest ally in the cabinet. The two men often spend evenings together, with Lincoln walking over to Seward's house, where they talk late into the night about everything from strategy to literature. Seward's home becomes a place where Lincoln can relax and speak freely, away from the constant pressures of the White House. As spring arrives, General Hooker prepares for a major offensive against Confederate forces in Virginia. His plan is clever, to outflank the Confederate army rather than attacking head-on, and Lincoln is cautiously optimistic. But at the Battle of Chancellorsville in May, Confederate General Robert E. Lee once again demonstrates his tactical genius, dividing his forces and routing Hooker's larger army. It's another devastating defeat for the Union. The pattern seems endless. New general, new strategy, new defeat. Lincoln's cabinet is divided on what to do next. Some want to replace Hooker immediately. Others counsel patience. Lincoln, who has been studying military strategy intensively, grows increasingly frustrated with generals who won't fight aggressively. He's learning that technical military training doesn't necessarily produce the kind of determined leadership needed to win this war. In June 1863, Lincoln makes another change, appointing General George Meade to command the Army of the Potomac. Almost immediately, Meade is tested when Lee launches an invasion of Pennsylvania. The Confederate Army marches north through Maryland into Pennsylvania, threatening Harrisburg and potentially even Philadelphia. The North holds its breath, knowing that a Confederate victory on Union soil could be devastating. During this crisis, Lincoln's leadership is fully on display. He coordinates with his cabinet daily, with Stanton managing the military logistics, Seward handling diplomatic concerns to prevent foreign intervention, and Chase ensuring funds are available for the massive military mobilization. The cabinet functions as a true team during this emergency, setting aside personal differences to address the crisis. On July 1st, the Union and Confederate armies collide near a small Pennsylvania town called Gettysburg. For 3 days, the battle rages across fields and hills, the largest and bloodiest battle ever fought in North America. On the third day, Lee orders a desperate charge across open ground against the center of the Union line. This Pickett's charge, named after one of the Confederate generals who led it, fails catastrophically, with thousands of Southern soldiers cut down by Union fire. Lee retreats back to Virginia, and the Union claims victory. On the same day, July 4th, 1863, news arrives that Vicksburg, Mississippi, a Confederate stronghold on the Mississippi River, has surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant after a long siege. It's a double victory that marks a turning point in the war. Lincoln is elated by the news, but also frustrated when Meade fails to pursue Lee's retreating army. "We had them within our grasp," Lincoln laments. "We had only to stretch forth our hands, and they were ours. The war will continue for almost 2 more years because of these missed opportunities." Despite this disappointment, the victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg rejuvenate Northern morale and strengthen Lincoln politically. His team of rivals cabinet has weathered the crisis well, working together effectively despite their different perspectives and occasional conflicts. In November 1863, Lincoln travels to Gettysburg for the dedication of a national cemetery for the soldiers who died there. He's not the main speaker. That honor goes to Edward Everett, a famous orator who speaks for over 2 hours. Lincoln's remarks are meant to be brief, just a few appropriate comments to conclude the ceremony. In just 272 words, speaking for barely 2 minutes, Lincoln delivers what will become known as the Gettysburg Address, one of the most famous speeches in American history. He redefines the war not just as a struggle to preserve the Union, but as a test of whether a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal can endure. The speech ends with his commitment that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. What's remarkable about the Gettysburg Address is not just its eloquence, but how it captures the evolution of Lincoln's thinking and the nation's about the war's purpose. What began as a fight to preserve the Union has become a struggle for a new birth of freedom that truly lives up to the ideals of the Declaration of Independence. Lincoln doesn't think much of the speech at first, telling a friend afterward, "It is a flat failure." But newspapers across the country print it, and gradually its significance becomes clear. Edward Everett himself writes to Lincoln, "I should be glad if I could flatter myself that I came as near to the central idea of the occasion in 2 hours as you did in 2 minutes." As 1863 draws to a close, Lincoln's team of rivals continues to evolve. Bates, the oldest cabinet member, is growing less influential as the legal questions of the war's early days give way to military and Reconstruction concerns. Seward has become not just a valued advisor, but a friend who provides Lincoln with rare moments of relaxation and intellectual companionship. Chase remains brilliant but difficult. His presidential ambitions are hardly secret, and he allows his name to be put forward as a potential Republican candidate in 1864, despite serving in Lincoln's cabinet. Most presidents would fire such a disloyal subordinate immediately, but Lincoln continues to tolerate Chase because of his talent. "I have determined to shut my eyes to everything of the sort," Lincoln tells an aide. "Mr. Chase makes a good secretary, and I shall keep him where he is." Stanton, once Lincoln's harshest critic, has become one of his most loyal supporters, though his gruff personality hasn't softened. The War Department under Stanton runs with ruthless efficiency, a stark contrast to the chaos of the war's early days. Lincoln and Stanton develop a remarkable working relationship, with Lincoln often visiting the War Department telegraph office late at night to read the latest dispatches from the front. The relationship between Lincoln and his cabinet illustrates his remarkable emotional intelligence, what we might call people skills today. He understands each man's strengths and weaknesses, what motivates them, and how to get the best from them despite their differences. With Seward, Lincoln develops a friendship based on intellectual exchange and mutual respect. They enjoy each other's company and find relief from the pressures of war in conversation about books, ideas, and occasional humorous stories. With Chase, Lincoln practices patience and strategic tolerance. He accepts Chase's ambition and occasional disloyalty because of his undeniable talent, focusing on what Chase can contribute rather than on personal slights. With Stanton, Lincoln builds a relationship based on shared purpose and complementary skills. Lincoln doesn't need Stanton to like him personally, though Stanton grows to respect Lincoln enormously. He needs Stanton to run the War Department effectively, which he does. With Bates, Lincoln maintains a respectful professional relationship, valuing his legal expertise while understanding that his influence is limited by his more conservative views and advancing age. What makes Lincoln's management of his team of rivals so remarkable is that he never tries to suppress their individuality or force them into lockstep agreement. He wants their honest opinions and diverse perspectives, believing that better decisions emerge from rigorous debate. Yet, he also ensures that once a decision is made, the cabinet presents a unified front to the public and to Congress. Lincoln's secretary, John Hay, who observes the cabinet closely, marvels at Lincoln's ability to manage these strong personalities. "The president is the best of us," Hay writes in his diary, echoing Seward's earlier assessment. As winter descends on Washington once again, Lincoln faces new challenges. The 1864 presidential election looms on the horizon, and Lincoln's re-election is far from certain. The war has dragged on longer than anyone expected, with casualties mounting and no end in sight. Political opposition grows from both those who think Lincoln is doing too much and those who think he's doing too little. Despite these pressures, Lincoln maintains his steady leadership and his commitment to preserving both the Union and the new freedom promised by the Emancipation Proclamation. His team of rivals, despite their differences and occasional conflicts, continues to function as an effective governing body during one of the most challenging periods in American history. One cold December evening, Lincoln sits by the fire in the White House, reading reports from General Grant, now commanding all Union armies. Outside, snow begins to fall softly on the Capitol, covering the army camps that surround the city. The coming year will bring new challenges, new conflicts within his cabinet, and crucial military campaigns that will determine the fate of the nation. Lincoln sets aside his reports and gazes into the fire, his deeply lined face illuminated by the flickering flames. The burden of leadership rests heavily on him, yet he bears it with remarkable grace and resilience. His team of rivals may not always agree with him or with each other, but together they are steering the nation through its greatest crisis. As our story pauses for tonight, you might imagine yourself walking past the White House on that snowy evening, glancing up to see the tall figure of the president silhouetted against the window. Inside that building, decisions are being made that will shape the future of America and the meaning of freedom for generations to come. The soft patter of snowflakes against the window creates a gentle rhythm, like a lullaby from the past. Your eyelids may feel heavy now as you drift towards sleep. The year 1864 dawns cold and gray over Washington, the mood in the capital city matching the winter weather. After nearly 3 years of bloody conflict, the Civil War grinds on with no clear end in sight. Though the Union has won important victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg, the Confederate armies remain formidable. Every day, the terrible human cost of the war grows. Sons, brothers, and fathers who will never return home. In the White House, Abraham Lincoln's tall frame seems to have shrunk under the weight of responsibility. His face is deeply lined, his eyes sunken with fatigue. Visitors often comment on how much he has aged, how the vibrant man of 1861 has become almost ghostly in appearance. I feel as though I shall never be glad again, Lincoln confides to a friend after particularly heavy casualty reports arrive. Yet, Lincoln's inner strength remains undiminished. Each morning, he rises early, reads military dispatches, and prepares to face another day of war, politics, and the 1,000 lesser crises that demand a president's attention. And around him, his remarkable team of rivals continues to serve, though the relationships have evolved significantly since those early days of his presidency. William Seward, once Lincoln's chief competitor for the Republican nomination and initially skeptical of Lincoln's abilities, has become the president's closest friend and most trusted advisor. Most evenings, when Lincoln can spare the time, he walks the short distance from the White House to Seward's home, where the two men talk late into the night. They discuss strategy, share books and ideas, and sometimes simply sit in comfortable silence, finding brief respite from the pressures of war. His magnanimity is almost superhuman. Seward writes of Lincoln in a letter to his wife, "The president is the best of us." High praise indeed from a man who once thought himself far superior to the prairie lawyer from Illinois. Edwin Stanton, the war secretary who once called Lincoln a long-armed ape before joining the cabinet, has developed an unusual but effective partnership with the president. Stanton remains gruff, demanding, and quick-tempered, but his organizational genius has transformed the War Department from chaos into efficiency. Lincoln often visits the War Department telegraph office late at night, sometimes sleeping on a couch there to be near the latest news from the battlefields. The two men could hardly be more different in personality. Lincoln patient and forgiving, Stanton intense, and exacting. But they complement each other perfectly. When visitors come seeking military favors, Lincoln sometimes sends them to Stanton, knowing his war secretary will firmly refuse requests that Lincoln himself finds difficult to deny. When Stanton does so, Lincoln feigns helplessness. "You'll have to ask Mr. Stanton," he says with a twinkle in his eye. Salmon Chase, the brilliant but difficult Treasury Secretary, continues to undermine Lincoln while serving in his cabinet. Throughout 1863, Chase allowed his name to be put forward as a potential presidential candidate in 1864, essentially campaigning against the president he serves. He cultivates relationships with radical Republicans who criticize Lincoln for not moving aggressively enough against slavery and the South. Most presidents would immediately fire such a disloyal cabinet member, but Lincoln's approach is more nuanced. "I have determined to shut my eyes to everything of the sort," he tells an aide, explaining that Chase's talents as Treasury Secretary outweigh his personal disloyalty. "Mr. Chase makes a good secretary, and I shall keep him where he is." This tolerance has its limits, however. By early 1864, Chase's undermining of the president becomes too blatant to ignore. When Chase offers his resignation, something he has done multiple times before as a political maneuver, never expecting Lincoln to accept, Lincoln surprises him by saying yes. Chase is stunned to find himself suddenly out of the cabinet. Lincoln appoints William Pitt Fessenden, a respected senator from Maine, as the new Treasury Secretary. Fessenden initially refuses, claiming poor health, but Lincoln won't take no for an answer. "Fessenden," Lincoln says, "this is your duty, and you must take it." The departure of Chase removes one source of cabinet conflict, but creates new challenges. The radical Republicans who supported Chase are angry, and Lincoln must navigate these political waters carefully, especially with a presidential election approaching. Lincoln's political skills are tested as he balances different factions within his party while trying to maintain unity during wartime. Attorney General Edward Bates continues to serve loyally, though his influence has waned as the war progresses. The elderly statesman provides legal advice, but is increasingly out of step with the administration's evolving policies on emancipation and Reconstruction. By late 1864, Bates will submit his resignation, citing his age and desire to return to his large family in Missouri. The changes in Lincoln's cabinet reflect his pragmatic approach to leadership, keeping talented people as long as they contribute effectively, making changes when necessary, always focused on the ultimate goals of preserving the Union and establishing freedom. As spring arrives in 1864, the presidential election looms large in everyone's mind. Lincoln faces challenges from multiple directions. Some radical Republicans, unsatisfied with Lincoln's cautious approach to emancipation and Reconstruction, promote other candidates like John C. Fremont. Conservative Republicans worry about Lincoln's expanding view of presidential war powers. Democrats, rallying around former General George McClellan, criticize the war's conduct and call for peace negotiations. Lincoln's political position is precarious. No president since Andrew Jackson had won a second term, and no president had ever been re-elected during a civil war. Much depends on military success, which has been frustratingly elusive despite the Union's advantages in manpower and resources. In March 1864, Lincoln makes a crucial decision, appointing Ulysses S. Grant as General-in-Chief of all Union armies. Grant had proven himself in the Western theater of the war, capturing Vicksburg and winning battles in Tennessee. Unlike previous commanders of the Eastern armies, Grant has a straightforward, relentless approach to warfare. "I propose to fight it out on this line if it takes all summer," he famously telegraphs after bloody but inconclusive battles in Virginia. Grant develops a comprehensive strategy: apply pressure everywhere at once, denying the Confederacy the ability to shift forces between threatened points. While Grant himself will confront Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, General William Tecumseh Sherman will march toward Atlanta, a crucial Confederate transportation hub and manufacturing center. Lincoln has finally found a general who shares his strategic vision and determination. When critics complain about Grant's casualties and alleged drinking habits, Lincoln responds, "I cannot spare this man. He fights." After years of generals who wouldn't engage the enemy, Lincoln values Grant's willingness to keep pressing forward despite setbacks. As summer approaches, the military situation remains uncertain. Grant's overland campaign in Virginia produces horrific casualties at battles like the Wilderness, Spotsylvania, and Cold Harbor. Though Grant keeps pushing forward, each battle seems to end in stalemate rather than decisive victory. Sherman's advance toward Atlanta is slow and methodical, facing determined Confederate resistance. The high casualties and lack of clear progress demoralize the Northern public. By August 1864, Lincoln himself believes he will lose the upcoming election. "I am going to be beaten," he tells a friend, "and unless some great change takes place, badly beaten." He writes a memorandum, which he asks his cabinet members to sign without reading, pledging to cooperate with the president-elect between the election and inauguration to save the Union. Lincoln then seals the memo and puts it away, a contingency plan for what he sees as likely defeat. Within Lincoln's cabinet, the focus remains on winning the war, while managing the complexities of an election during wartime. Seward works to maintain international support and prevent foreign recognition of the Confederacy. Stanton manages the massive military logistics required for Grant's and Sherman's campaigns. The new Treasury Secretary, Fessenden, ensures the financial resources continue flowing to support the war effort. Then, in early September, the military situation suddenly improves. Sherman captures Atlanta, a major psychological and strategic victory that electrifies the North. Union Admiral David Farragut secures Mobile Bay in Alabama with his famous order, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." General Philip Sheridan begins driving Confederate forces from the Shenandoah Valley, Virginia's breadbasket that has fed Lee's army. These victories transform the political landscape. Northern morale soars, and Lincoln's prospects for re-election dramatically improve. The Democratic Party, which had adopted a platform calling the war a failure, suddenly looks out of touch with events. Their candidate, George McClellan, tries to distance himself from the peace elements of his party, but the contradiction weakens his campaign. In the November election, Lincoln wins a decisive victory, carrying 22 of 25 states that participate in the election. The 11 Confederate states, of course, do not vote. It's a powerful mandate to continue the war until victory, and to implement Lincoln's vision for Reconstruction and freedom. Lincoln views his re-election not as a personal triumph, but as the people's endorsement of the Union cause. The election was a necessity, he tells supporters serenading him at the White House. We cannot have free government without elections, and if the rebellion could force us to forego or postpone a national election, it might fairly claim to have already conquered and ruined us. With the election behind him, Lincoln focuses on bringing the war to a conclusion and planning for the nation's future. In December 1864, he makes another significant cabinet change, appointing Salmon Chase as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court following the death of Roger Taney. Many are surprised by this choice, given Chase's previous disloyalty to Lincoln. When friends question why Lincoln would elevate a political rival to such an important position, Lincoln explains, "We need a man on the Supreme Court who will sustain our view of emancipation and the constitutional measures taken to secure it. Chase is a radical, and he would go the whole length. Besides, by putting him on the bench, I get rid of him." It's a classic Lincoln move, combining practical political considerations with a willingness to look beyond personal slights to the greater good. Chase, with his strong anti-slavery convictions, is indeed the right man to protect the legal status of emancipation. That Lincoln can see this, despite their difficult personal history, shows his remarkable ability to separate personal feelings from public duty. Lincoln also begins shaping his vision for Reconstruction, how the Southern states will be brought back into the Union after the war. He favors a relatively generous approach, famously saying he would treat the South with malice toward none, with charity for all. This position puts him at odds with the radical Republicans in Congress, who want harsher treatment of former Confederates and stronger protections for freed slaves. As 1864 ends and 1865 begins, military events move toward a climax. Sherman completes his devastating march to the sea across Georgia, then turns north through the Carolinas, bringing the war's destruction into the heartland of the Confederacy. Grant maintains relentless pressure on Lee's army around Richmond and Petersburg, Virginia. The Confederate government, running out of men, money, and supplies, faces inevitable defeat. Through these momentous events, Lincoln's leadership style remains consistent. He listens to diverse perspectives from his cabinet and generals, makes decisions based on core principles rather than ideology, and maintains a steady focus on the twin goals of union and freedom. His team of rivals, though changed from its original composition, continues to provide the varied expertise and viewpoints that Lincoln values. In early 1865, Lincoln works with Congress to pass the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which will permanently abolish slavery throughout the United States. Unlike the Emancipation Proclamation, which was a wartime measure that only applied to states in rebellion, the amendment will ensure that slavery cannot legally exist anywhere in America. Lincoln throws his personal prestige and political capital behind the amendment, working to secure the necessary votes in Congress. On January 31st, 1865, Congress passes the 13th Amendment and sends it to the states for ratification. Though the process won't be completed until December 1865, after Lincoln's death, the passage by Congress is a momentous achievement and the fulfillment of Lincoln's long-held dream to end the monstrous injustice of slavery. In his second inaugural address on March 4th, 1865, Lincoln delivers what many consider his greatest speech. Rather than celebrating imminent victory or outlining specific policies, Lincoln reflects on the meaning of the war in almost biblical terms, suggesting that the conflict might be divine punishment for the national sin of slavery. Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away, he says. Yet, if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago. So still, it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. The speech concludes with the famous appeal that will guide Lincoln's approach to Reconstruction: with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. Frederick Douglass, the great black abolitionist who attends the inaugural, later describes it as a sacred effort, capturing how Lincoln has elevated political discourse to a spiritual plane, finding meaning in the suffering of war beyond mere politics or power. As Lincoln delivers these words of healing and reconciliation, Union forces continue to tighten the noose around the Confederacy. Sherman's army moves north through the Carolinas, while Grant pushes toward Richmond. Confederate desertion rates soar as soldiers lose hope and leave to try to protect their families. In early April 1865, Richmond finally falls to Union forces. Lincoln visits the Confederate capital, walking through streets still smoldering from fires set during the evacuation. Newly freed slaves gather around him, some falling to their knees in gratitude. "Don't kneel to me," Lincoln tells them. "You must kneel to God only, and thank him for your freedom." On April 9th, 1865, at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, Robert E. Lee surrenders the Army of Northern Virginia to Ulysses S. Grant. The Union victory celebrations are tempered by Lincoln's instructions. "I want no humiliation, no unnecessary suffering," he tells Grant before the surrender. Grant offers generous terms, allowing Confederate soldiers to return home without fear of prosecution, even letting them keep their horses and mules for spring planting. The long, bloody Civil War is effectively over. Though some Confederate forces remain in the field, their surrender is only a matter of time. Lincoln and his cabinet begin the serious work of planning Reconstruction, debating how to reintegrate the Southern states while protecting the freedom of 4 million formerly enslaved people. During a cabinet meeting on April 14th, 1865, Good Friday, Lincoln shares a strange dream he had the night before. In the dream, he wandered through a silent White House, hearing sobbing but finding no one, until he entered the East Room and saw a corpse on a catafalque, surrounded by mourners. When Lincoln asked a soldier who had died, the soldier replied, "The President. He was killed by an assassin." The cabinet members are disturbed by the dream, but Lincoln, never superstitious, dismisses it. The meeting focuses on Reconstruction plans, with Lincoln advocating for a path that balances justice with reconciliation. After 4 years of conflict within his cabinet, there is now a remarkable harmony of purpose. The team of rivals has become a true team, forged by the crucible of war and Lincoln's patient leadership. That evening, Lincoln and his wife Mary plan to attend a play At Ford's Theater, Our American Cousin. The president has been working tirelessly and looks forward to a few hours of relaxation. As twilight falls over Washington, Lincoln signs a few final documents and prepares to leave the White House for what will be the last time. As our story pauses tonight, we leave Abraham Lincoln in this moment of hard-won triumph, having preserved the Union and set America on the path toward a new birth of freedom. His team of rivals, those talented, difficult, brilliant men who began as competitors and became colleagues under his leadership, have played their parts in this great national drama. The gaslights along Pennsylvania Avenue flicker on as evening descends. In homes throughout Washington and across the nation, families gather, many with empty chairs, representing those lost in the long conflict. But there is hope now. Hope for peace, for reunion, for a more perfect union, built on the promise of freedom for all. Your eyes may feel heavy now, as you imagine the quiet streets of Washington on that spring evening, the clip-clop of horses pulling the presidential carriage toward Ford's Theater, the stars emerging in the twilight sky. The evening of April 14th, 1865, is mild and pleasant in Washington. Cherry blossoms float on gentle breezes, their sweet scent mingling with the earthy smell of spring. The city is in a festive mood. After 4 long years of war, peace is finally at hand. Colorful bunting decorates buildings, and American flags flutter from windowsills. Even the weather seems to celebrate. With clear skies and perfect temperatures replacing the usual spring chill. At the White House, Abraham Lincoln finishes his dinner and prepares for an evening at the theater. He's been working tirelessly since dawn, meeting with his cabinet, reviewing military dispatches, and signing paperwork. The president is exhausted, but also relieved. The great burden he has carried, preserving the Union through its most terrible crisis, is lightening at last. "I need a laugh," Lincoln tells his wife Mary as their carriage rolls toward Ford's Theater. The play tonight is Our American Cousin, a popular comedy. After years of war's grim business, an evening of simple entertainment seems perfect. Lincoln's bodyguard, a policeman named John Parker, escorts the presidential couple to their box overlooking the stage, but then, inexplicably, leaves his post during the performance. This carelessness will have catastrophic consequences. As the play progresses, a man slips quietly into the presidential box. He is John Wilkes Booth, a well-known actor and Confederate sympathizer who has been plotting against Lincoln for months. Booth waits for a moment when the audience is laughing at a funny line, then raises a small Derringer pistol and fires a single shot into the back of Lincoln's head. "Sic semper tyrannis," Booth shouts, Latin for "thus always to tyrants," as he leaps from the box to the stage below. Though he breaks his leg in the fall, Booth manages to escape in the ensuing chaos. Lincoln slumps forward in his chair, unconscious. There is little blood, but the wound is fatal. Doctors rush to the president's side, but can do nothing except move him to a boarding house across the street, where they place his long frame diagonally across a bed too short for his height. Members of Lincoln's cabinet hurry to the scene as news of the assassination spreads through Washington like wildfire. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton arrives first, taking charge of the situation with his characteristic efficiency. despite his obvious distress. Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles, Secretary of the Interior John Usher, and others gather in the small room where Lincoln lies dying. "Now he belongs to the ages," Stanton says softly, as Lincoln draws his last breath at 7:22 the next morning, April 15th, 1865. What few in the room know is that Lincoln's assassination is part of a larger conspiracy. That same night, Lewis Powell, another Booth accomplice, attacks Secretary of State William Seward in his home, stabbing him multiple times. Seward survives only because a metal brace he is wearing, after a carriage accident, deflects the knife. A third conspirator, assigned to kill Vice President Andrew Johnson, loses his nerve and gets drunk instead. The nation is plunged into grief and shock. Abraham Lincoln, who guided the country through civil war, ended slavery, and offered a vision of malice toward none, charity for all, is gone. The hope of a gentle reconstruction under his wise leadership vanishes in a single moment of violence. In the days following Lincoln's death, his team of rivals demonstrates the strength of character he cultivated in them. Stanton, despite his personal grief, works tirelessly to manage the crisis, coordinate the manhunt for Booth, and maintain government functions. Seward, recovering from his wounds, provides stability to the State Department. The other cabinet members continue their duties while participating in the elaborate funeral ceremonies. Lincoln's body is taken by train from Washington back to his hometown of Springfield, Illinois, for burial. The funeral train travels slowly through cities and towns where millions of Americans line the tracks to pay their respects. In death, Lincoln achieves a unity of national mourning that eluded the country in life. The team of rivals Lincoln assembled and led must now serve a new president, Andrew Johnson, who lacks Lincoln's political skills, emotional intelligence, and moral vision. Without Lincoln's steady hand, the cabinet begins to fragment. Johnson, a Southern Democrat who remained loyal to the Union, has very different ideas about Reconstruction than most Republican cabinet members. Tensions quickly emerge between President Johnson and the radical Republicans in Congress over how to treat the defeated South and protect the rights of freed slaves. Johnson favors rapid readmission of Southern states with few conditions, while radical Republicans want to ensure political rights for Black Americans and prevent former Confederates from regaining power. Secretary of War Stanton sides with the radical Republicans, putting him at odds with Johnson. Their conflict will eventually lead to the first presidential impeachment in American history, when Johnson attempts to remove Stanton from office in violation of the Tenure of Office Act. Meanwhile, Seward, still recovering from his wounds, becomes Johnson's closest advisor, supporting the president's more lenient approach to the South. This puts Seward at odds with his former Republican allies and damages his political reputation. Many who once respected him now consider him a traitor to the party's principles. Chief Justice Chase presides over Johnson's impeachment trial in the Senate, where the president is acquitted by a single vote. Chase later regrets his role in the proceedings, believing Johnson's policies have damaged Reconstruction efforts. The personal legacy of Lincoln's leadership continues to shape his former cabinet members. Stanton works himself to exhaustion, defending radical Reconstruction, until Johnson finally forces him from office in 1868. When Ulysses S. Grant becomes president, he nominates Stanton to the Supreme Court, but the former war secretary dies just 4 days after his confirmation. his health broken by years of wartime service. Seward continues as Secretary of State under Johnson and later orchestrates the purchase of Alaska from Russia in 1867, derided as Seward's folly at the time, but recognized today as one of the greatest diplomatic achievements in American history. After leaving government service, Seward travels around the world, writing about his experiences until his death in 1872. Chase serves as Chief Justice until his death in 1873, issuing important rulings on Reconstruction and civil rights. However, he never achieves his lifelong ambition of becoming president, despite continued political maneuvering. Bates returns to his home in Missouri after resigning from the cabinet in late 1864. He spends his final years practicing law and writing, deeply concerned about the course of Reconstruction under Johnson, but too elderly to significantly influence events. Though Lincoln's team of rivals disperses after his death, the impact of his leadership style, his ability to bring together diverse perspectives, manage strong personalities, and foster collaboration despite differences, leaves a lasting mark on American governance. What made Lincoln such an extraordinary leader? Why was he able to succeed with a cabinet of talented but difficult men where others might have failed? Several qualities stand out when we look back at his remarkable journey. First, Lincoln possessed exceptional emotional intelligence. He understood people, their motivations, their insecurities, their strengths and weaknesses. He sensed when to push and when to relent, when to confront and when to let matters resolve themselves. Where other leaders might have taken disagreements personally, Lincoln looked past the immediate conflict to the underlying issues and relationships. "I don't like that man," Lincoln once said about a political opponent. "I must get to know him better." This comment captures his approach perfectly, responding to difficulty with curiosity rather than anger, seeking understanding rather than victory in personal conflicts. Second, Lincoln had the rare ability to acknowledge his mistakes and learn from them. Early in the war, when he appointed incompetent generals or approved flawed strategies, Lincoln took responsibility rather than blaming others. "I am the president, and I am responsible," he would say. This willingness to acknowledge errors and adapt earned him respect even from critics. Third, Lincoln maintained a remarkable balance between confidence in his core principles and openness to other perspectives. He knew what mattered most, preserving the Union and eventually ending slavery, but remained flexible about methods and timing. This allowed him to incorporate good ideas from anyone, regardless of personal feelings or political rivalries. Fourth, Lincoln practiced extraordinary patience. When cabinet members like Chase undermined him politically, Lincoln responded not with immediate punishment, but with strategic tolerance, keeping talented people in positions where they could serve the country effectively, despite their personal ambitions or rivalries. Finally, Lincoln used humor as a leadership tool. His stories and jokes weren't just for entertainment. They diffused tension, made difficult truths more palatable, and created human connections across political divisions. Even in the darkest moments of the war, Lincoln found ways to lighten the mood without diminishing the seriousness of the situation. These qualities allowed Lincoln to create and maintain one of the most remarkable leadership teams in American history. By bringing former rivals into his cabinet, he gained access to diverse perspectives, talents, and political constituencies. By managing their conflicts effectively, he prevented their differences from paralyzing the government during a critical time. The concept of a team of rivals that Lincoln pioneered has influenced American leadership ever since. Other presidents have followed Lincoln's example by appointing political competitors to key positions, recognizing that good governance sometimes requires setting aside personal feelings for the greater good. More broadly, Lincoln's approach demonstrates that effective leadership isn't about surrounding yourself with people who always agree with you or who pose no challenge to your authority. Rather, the best leaders bring together talented individuals with diverse viewpoints, create an environment where honest disagreement is valued, and then find ways to channel those different perspectives toward common goals. In the decades following Lincoln's death, America continued to struggle with the issues he'd faced. How to create a more perfect union that truly lived up to its founding ideals of liberty and equality for all. The promise of the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment was undermined by new systems of racial oppression. The reconciliation Lincoln had hoped for between North and South was delayed by bitterness and continued conflict. Yet Lincoln's legacy endured. His words and example inspired future generations, fighting for justice and equality. The team of rivals he assembled, despite their human flaws and political differences, showed what was possible when talented people put country above personal ambition and worked together despite their differences. Lincoln's story reminds us that leadership is not just about personal achievement or power. It's about bringing out the best in others, creating teams that are greater than the sum of their parts, and fostering collaboration, even among those who begin as competitors. It's about having the wisdom to listen to different perspectives and the courage to chart a course based on core principles rather than passing popularity. Today, more than 150 years after Lincoln's death, his approach to leadership still offers valuable lessons. In a world often divided by partisan conflicts and personal rivalries, Lincoln shows us another path, one where differences are acknowledged but not allowed to prevent progress, where former enemies can become allies in a greater cause, where leadership is measured not by dominance, but by the ability to bring diverse talents together for the common good. When we look at Lincoln's cabinet, the team of rivals he assembled and led through America's greatest crisis, we see not just a historical curiosity, but a model for how leadership can work at its best. We see how Lincoln's emotional intelligence, patience, humor, and core principles created an environment where strong personalities could contribute their talents without destructive conflict. As we conclude our story of Abraham Lincoln and his team of rivals, we might reflect on how their example applies to our own lives. We may not lead nations or make decisions that affect millions, but we all face situations where we must work with people whose views or personalities differ from our own. We all encounter rivals who might, with the right approach, become teammates instead. Lincoln's wisdom speaks across the years. Do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends? In families and classrooms, workplaces and communities, we can apply Lincoln's approach, listening to diverse perspectives, focusing on common goals rather than personal differences, using humor to ease tensions, and always maintaining a commitment to core principles while remaining flexible about methods. The light dims on our historical journey now. We leave Abraham Lincoln to history, to the ages that Stanton said he belonged to at the moment of his death. Yet, in another sense, Lincoln remains very much with us, in his words that still inspire, in the nation he preserved, and in the leadership lessons he taught by example. As you drift towards sleep, you might imagine standing at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, looking up at the massive marble statue of the seated president. His eyes seem to gaze not just at the National Mall stretching before him, but into the future he helped create, a future still unfolding, still being shaped by how well we apply the wisdom he left us. The team of rivals, Lincoln, Seward, Chase, Bates, Stanton, and the others who served with them, have long since returned to dust. The world they knew, of gas lamps and horse carriages, telegraph wires, and handwritten letters, has given way to one they could scarcely imagine. Yet, the essential human challenges they faced remain remarkably familiar. How to bridge differences, how to maintain unity amid diversity, how to lead with both principle and pragmatism. Perhaps tonight, as sleep approaches, their example will inspire your own dreams of leadership that brings out the best in others, of rivals transformed into allies, of differences that strengthen rather than divide. Perhaps, like Lincoln, you'll find yourself looking beyond immediate conflicts to deeper possibilities of collaboration and common purpose. The soft rhythm of your breathing slows now, like the gentle rocking of a train. Perhaps the funeral train, carrying Lincoln home to Springfield after his work was done. Or perhaps a train carrying you forward into your own tomorrow, where the legacy of Lincoln and his team of rivals awaits your own interpretation and application. Sleep well, dreaming, perhaps, of tall hats and beard-shadowed faces, of cabinet rooms where history was made, of a nation torn apart and stitched back together. But dream too of the future, where Lincoln's wisdom about leadership and human nature remains as relevant as ever, waiting to guide new generations facing their own challenges and opportunities. For that is the true legacy of Lincoln and his team of rivals, not just what they accomplished in their time, but what they teach us about accomplishing great things in our own. Throughout our story, we've traveled through one of the most challenging periods in American history. We've seen how Abraham Lincoln rose from humble beginnings to become one of history's greatest leaders. We've witnessed how he assembled a remarkable team from his former rivals, harnessing their talents and managing their conflicts to guide the nation through civil war. We've observed his unique leadership qualities, his emotional intelligence, patience, humor, and unwavering commitment to both union and freedom. Lincoln's journey reminds us that greatness often emerges from unexpected places, that leadership isn't just about personal achievement, but about bringing out the best in others, and that even the most bitter rivals can become valuable allies when guided by a leader with the right skills and character. As we close this final chapter, we might ask ourselves, what team of rivals exists in our own lives? What different perspectives might we bring together? What common purposes might unite those who begin as competitors? Like Lincoln, we too can seek to build bridges rather than walls, to find strength in diversity rather than fear, and to lead with both principle and pragmatism. Lincoln's story continues to inspire not because he was perfect, he wasn't, but because he showed what is possible when leadership combines wisdom, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to core values. His team of rivals demonstrated that a group of strong-willed, talented individuals, despite their differences and occasional conflicts, can accomplish extraordinary things when united by a common purpose and guided by a leader who brings out their best. As you drift into sleep, carry with you not just the history we've explored, but the possibilities it suggests for tomorrow. For in that tomorrow, the wisdom of Lincoln and his team of rivals awaits your own discovery and application, ready to guide new journeys toward a more perfect union in whatever community or context you find yourself. Good night now, as the pages of history gently close and sleep opens the door to dreams perhaps touched by the spirit of Abraham Lincoln, the prairie lawyer who became a president, the self-taught man who became a sage, and the leader who transformed